What we want to do is actually have this as a real time where you can actually just take in and really listen to from the perspectives of people who are on the front line serving entrepreneurs. Not only that, but they are each of them on their own right individuals of color who are doing this work. And so we invite you to actively listen during this time from the lenses of time, so past, present, and future. We want you to think about also this idea of how do you, your own personal identity. So from a personal perspective, as we've been sharing, this starts from internal, and then think about your positioning. Who are you in your ecosystem? What power do you hold? And also, what resonates with you and what you're hearing? Where do you sit? And what ability do you have to maybe make a difference in some of the things that you're hearing? And I am going to ask each of the folks to introduce themselves. And as we do this, I'm going to have each of them share what their personal definition is of one of our ABIDE terms. So I am going to start and kick it off with Magali Yasen. So Magali, would love to have you introduce yourself and the work that Hustle does. And also, what does the word access mean to you in this context?
Sure. Thank you so much, Faye, and to everyone at Forward Cities and Ecosystems Unite for Entrepreneur Unite for having us here today. I think, first of all, let me introduce the organization. Hustle Winston-Salem is an organization that myself, Faye, and 4 other Black entrepreneurs in the Winston-Salem community started about 5 years ago. And it was primarily because in our community then and honestly now, there is a huge gap when it comes to entrepreneurship, as you all know. And at the time, there wasn't any programming or anything specific for people of color when it comes to entrepreneurship. So we took it upon ourselves and our passions to do that with Hustle. And we do that through telling stories, through trying to break some of the systems that we see that are hurting entrepreneurs in our community, and also by providing some solutions, whether those solutions are through programming. And the plan was to provide some solutions as well through capital. But let me say, as I transition a little bit into access, that even as an entrepreneur myself, and as running an organization that's trying to help entrepreneurs of colors, we even face the issue of access to capital. So when I think about access, that's the very first thing that I think entrepreneurs deal with. Capital, it's the biggest issue. A lot of times I hear that we don't have access to things like programming, or we don't have access to the tools or the systems and things that we need. And I just don't subscribe to that personally, because we do. And we have organizations like Hustle and many others that provide that. But those organizations, just as much as the entrepreneurs themselves, just don't get the access to capital. So when I think about access in the process of ABIDE, of how you all just shared it with us so eloquently, that's the major thing that I think about when it comes to access. And it really is something that I think we have to take a larger discussion about at some point as communities, because sometimes people think giving somebody a $5,000 grant solves the problem, or sometimes people think giving somebody a $10,000 investment and then taking 10% of their company solves the problem. That's not truly access, but I don't want to get too deep into it. I know you gave me a 2-minute window, but yeah, that's it. That's it in a nutshell.
Thank you, Magali. I look forward to digging in more a little bit later. So would like to introduce Elsie Johnson, who actually shares my same maiden name. She's coming out of Franklin County, Ohio. Would love for you to introduce yourself and your work at Zora's House. And also, what does the word belonging mean for you, Elsie, in this context?
All right, thank you so much for having me. So for those of y'all in the audience, I will share a secret that Faye emailed us, and she said, listen, no holds barred. And I was like, Faye trying to get me in trouble. So I am really excited to be here. I love having these conversations. I do serve as the director of local entrepreneurship for Franklin County, Columbus, Ohio. And I'm also the founder of Zora's House, which is a co-working space and leadership incubator that centers the healing, creativity, leadership, and activism of women of color. We have a lot of entrepreneurs who come to our space, and we have many women of color and support women of color who are birthing their leadership and businesses and activism into the world. So I thought a lot about the concept of belonging. And when I think about belonging, I think about existing in spaces that honor all of the parts of who you are. So many of us may be familiar with the work of Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, who introduced the concept of intersectionality, the idea that we have all of these intersecting parts of our identities. And so existing in spaces that honor all of those parts of who you are is so important. And I'll take it a step further and saying existing in spaces that are created with you in mind, right? And so oftentimes we may hear the words kind of like, oh, our systems are broken, but in fact, our systems aren't broken. This country was based and created with the idea of white people being supreme over all other racial identities and groups. And so every single system that we created from the foundation of this country was based on that concept. So when I think about race, when I think about belonging, when I think about entrepreneurships and other ways to support and empower people of color, I have to ask organizations, was your organization created with people in mind, with people of color in mind? And I say that very specifically because many organizations need to be broken down and completely recreated, right? Like oftentimes we're very excited about the history. Oh, we've been around for 100 years. I look at organizations like that, I'm like, no. I already know you being problematic. Something about you is problematic. Let's figure out what it is. I think it's really important to honor our history, but I think it's also really important to recognize that belonging means creating and if need be, recreating organizations and systems that are based on the values that we are trying to build going forward, and not based on the like super trash racist values that we had, when many of these systems were built. So.
Thank you for the no holds barred conversation starter, Elsie. This is why we are doing this. Thank you. Would love to jump forward and actually introduce Charlton. Thank you so much for agreeing to be here. Can you share, about your work at HBCU BC, and also what's your take on the word inclusion in this context?
I kind of want Elsie just to keep going. No, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces. So those who don't know me, my name is Charlton Cunningham. My work at HBCU VC focuses on basically creating how we want to change how capital is created and distributed to increase more opportunities for Black and Latinx innovators. And we are really focused on bringing more racial and ethnic diversity to the venture capital space. We all know the funding gap issues, and the way that we're looking at it is if we can create more investors of color, that'll be our way of attacking that. And so Faye mentioned, what is inclusion? To me, what do I think about? I really think about that in relation to access. And so a lot of times people will say access is giving someone a seat at the table. And I think inclusion is allowing someone the voice and the agency to speak at the table. And so inclusion for me has a lot to do with agency. Do you have the ability to make a decision? Are you in a leadership position? Do you have the ability to get there? Inclusion has a lot to do with, can I make those decisions? And it's important for our work because we're trying to place people in the decisions where they can write checks, because that's how things change. And so for me, that's what I think about inclusion, is that awareness, that agency, and that's that opportunity to actually participate in the ecosystem. Not just be there, not just be a token, or oh, we have one there, you can look. Like, no, can I make change in the places that I'm that I'm sitting at? And so that's what inclusion kind of comes to mind for me.
Thank you so much, Charlton. That token word, all of us in this conversation, we know that we've been that in many of the rooms that we sit in, and many of the experiences that we've had, and it is it's a little bit exhausting because then you have to be the one. You have to hold it up and you have to show up in a certain way. Thank you for emerging that. I'm gonna hop forward to Darlisa Ditz. Would love for you to introduce yourself and the work that you do. And what do you think of this word diversity? What does that bring to mind for you?
Okay, so you gave me a curveball. My word was originally equity, but I can flip to diversity, no problem.
No, you know what? Nope, you're right. Equity. Go with equity. You're good. We'll go back to Hassan in a second.
Okay. All right, so I am Darlisa Dills. I am the managing director and owner of the North Texas Entrepreneur Education and Training Center, and our focus is to provide that platform for individuals that don't have access to the entrepreneurial world. So similar to a lot of the stories that have taken place here, I started my center because of the lack of support. So we provide information in the form of education so that people can't say that they don't know. So we help them to structure their businesses, get them connected, put them in contact with resources that are available to them, and help them strengthen the entrepreneurial journey for themselves. What I think about when I hear the word equity or how it relates is when you think about equity in anything else that you have, your house, your car, whatever the case may be, that means stake in the game. And that means you have put something into your business, or you have put something into your community. Oftentimes that's dismissed. As a Black woman, a young Black woman, I'm a millennial. So as Shayla was mentioning, you fit so many different categories, right? Oftentimes people dismiss that equity. I've been doing quote unquote ecosystem building for years, since I was probably in college and had no idea. So because I am not up to par with where they feel I should be in their knowledge without even knowing me, really, they feel that I don't have enough equity in the system to be able to produce this capacity of a center or this type of environment for people. And I know many of the entrepreneurs that come into our space or come through our platform experience the same. So equity for me means, hey, Google me, baby. I'm out there. Like, I don't have to fit your standards in order to have knowledge for what it is that I'm doing. So that's what it means for me.
I'm glad you spun it. that I was not expecting that. It's beautiful to think about that from that word has so many meanings, and beautiful to take it back to this idea that, and it goes back to that bias part, right? People are assuming that you don't know, you can't do what you are. It's all about what you're not capable of, and no one's ever going to say it to our faces, right? It is, but that's the assumption. You feel it. You sense it from what you are allowed to do, what you're provided, how funny you get to do this or that, and how you see other people just get handed out, right? And not have to do anything to prove for it or to prove it or have the impacts for it, right? People can crash things and then get given more money to do other things that if we were to crash something, done, right? So I think headline news, exactly. Okay, yeah, this is what I thought it was going to be. This is good. But let me introduce Hassan. Would love for you to share, Hassan, about the work that you do at Forward Cities, and also what does diversity mean for you in this context?
Thank you, Faye. Great to be here with everyone. Actually, I'm seeing a lot of faces from the eShip Summit world and the Startup Champions world that I haven't seen in a while. So good to be with you all. So I am Hassan Bazi. I'm the Director of Community Innovation at Forward Cities. And at Forward Cities, our mission is we work with communities and regions to grow and sustain more equitable entrepreneur ecosystems. And I oversee the work on our national side in cities, Franklin County, Columbus, Indianapolis, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and New Haven. I'm based in Detroit, and I would, similar to a lot of folks that have gone before me, I would consider myself an ecosystem builder. And I probably my entire life, I've been an ecosystem builder and an entrepreneur before I even knew what those words were. And part of that, I think, goes back to maybe when I was younger. I guess before we even knew what ADD was, I think I had a very restless nature. So I was always like creativity and entrepreneurship were the things that I was drawn to. Um, Diversity, really interesting, because I was reflecting on this, and I think if I go back to when I was younger, to me, diversity back when I was younger was you had a group of people who were those who were the in crowd in terms of like those who held power, who were the system, and then you had the other. So you had those two groups, and diversity was at that time the other. So that whole group that I think was defined as the other. So they fell under the definition of that's what diversity is. So you had the two groups. I would say, so for me, diversity, I mean, there are a lot of, and again, so if you go back to just the two groups, but then you have diversity in terms of, age, sexual identity, ethnicity, race, gender, and even within those groups, you've got, what marital status, socioeconomic status. You've got all these different categories. For me, I mean, I would say this as someone who immigrated from the Middle East. Growing up, and even to this day, I mean, people, it's very easy to lump people into one group based on what group they belong to. But diversity in terms of like my background is you go back to my heritage and people from the Middle East, you've got 21 countries across the Middle East, a variety of different religions. Culture varies. I mean, the language may be similar, but dialects are so different that sometimes you could be speaking to someone from Northern Africa, from an Arab country in Northern Africa, and someone from Iraq may not understand each other. It's the same language. So diversity, I mean, diversity for me is, so you've got access, opportunity, and design. That's how I look at diversity, and it's design of systems, resources, policy. So you've got the people who are diversity among the people who are designing systems and who are in control of systems, and thinking to the end result of the people that would actually be impacted by all of those things and how diverse that group of people is. So I'm looking at it from, I guess, a variety of different perspectives, and not just the typical, putting people into boxes that you can check.
Thank you, Hassan. I think it's really important. It goes back to what Shayla said, is like we tend to judge people by what we see, and diversity is the same, right? We tend to think of diversity just by what's in front of our eyes, not by the other 95% of who people are, right? What else, who are we, and what are we bringing into these ecosystems, into these conversations? Really grateful to have that unique perspective. I'm going to jump forward and ask Gabe to introduce himself and his work. He's fantastic work, by the way, that he's doing in Kansas City. And also, Gabe's going to flip it a little bit here and share reflections on what effect COVID-19 has had on, when he thinks about this, on all this entire ecosystem world we're diving into. So, Gabe.
Yeah, no, thank you for letting me be part of this conversation. So my name is Gabe Munoz, and I'm the local director of the eShip communities in Kansas City. And our mission is to create a more equitable and inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystem through a ground up approach. And so we've taken a really grassroots approach. We've gone out and connected with small businesses, really just going door to door, getting to understand what are the barriers small businesses are going through, and they're working together with community entrepreneurs to build several pilot projects to help address the barriers and reduce the barriers to entrepreneurship. And so that's what my work has been doing here in Kansas City. But going to your question, Faye, just through COVID, we know entrepreneurs were already vulnerable. And so many small businesses of color are going to be disproportionately impacted by COVID. And so some of the things that kind of stuck out to me just from the work before and during COVID is just that there's just a big lack of communication and connections within the communities. And because of this, a lot of the small businesses of color are not getting information in a timely manner. And a lot of these grants and programs, as they're coming out, funds were being dispersed right away, and folks were applying, and application deadlines were ending really quickly. And so a lot of the communities of color just didn't get access to be able to apply for grants and fundings. And many of the small businesses already tended to face underlying issues that make it harder to run and scale their business already. And so, and a lot of the businesses of color also tend to be more concentrated in industries that were immediately impacted by COVID. So things like hair salons, restaurants, home health care, where they had to shut down overnight. And so a lot of them, like I said, didn't have a lot. They had a big lack of awareness of the resources. A lot of the small businesses were self-funded already, and so they had less capital to be able to work with. Many of the small businesses, as these programs came out, like PPP and the idle loan programs, most small businesses of color didn't want to leverage those resources because they were already worried about being able to pay back and already barely making ends meet at times. In addition to that, quite a few of the small businesses didn't have existing relationship with bankers. So even though they have a bank already or whatnot, where they have a business bank account, they just didn't know anybody. And even when they reached out, nobody was connecting back to them, providing help. The larger banks tended to be going to their larger customers and clients and helping them, but not to the small businesses. I remember even having a small business that she was going to be able to qualify for, it's like $700 in PPP. And a banker didn't want to work with her, and told her own bank and told her it's just too much time for her, really, for the amount of money that she's going to be able to get. And so it's really disheartening to see. The small business has been really intimidated with completing the paperwork. They didn't want to mess up. And so really been looking for folks who will help them with filling out that paperwork. Not that they didn't have the answers a lot of times because they knew their information. They just were intimidated because it's federal forms. They just didn't want something to come back on them. And so I think COVID's definitely highlighted the important role our small businesses of color play in our communities. We're seeing a lot of programs coming up and initiatives that have launched recently to help address some of these gaps, but we definitely still have a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Gabe. Yeah, I just dropped something in chat because something really came to me as you were talking, and that is like, we don't lack networks. We don't lack relationships. We got that in spades. Like we're used to actually coming together to support one another in times of need, and in particular in times of need, right? So it's not that we're not, the thriving that's happening right now and the resiliency that's happening is because we know how to go through hard stuff and we know how to be there for each other. The challenge is that the people we know, our networks, are not the people with the money and the power that we need to turn this around. And that's the thing that we've got to get to. So imagine if we had both, imagine what will be possible, right? So I'm gonna jump forward to a new round of this conversation. We'd love to, we're gonna do a round robin. So I'm gonna ask Magali a question and then she's gonna ask the next person a question. We're gonna go like that. So Magali, I'm gonna ask you, and this is a very unique opportunity. Like we said, no holds barred. You can say anything in this room because guess what we agreed to? Safe space, right? Magali, what is the biggest thing you wish that allies understood about entrepreneurs of color?
I think the biggest thing for me is we don't need allies. I wish they understood that. So, and what I want to explain what I mean by that so it don't come across completely rude. So yes, it's nice to have your allyship. It's nice to have your friendship. But I really love this concept that one of our counterparts at Hustle, Kelly Easton, created. We created a framework called Our Place, Our Space this year, our newest initiative. And one of the things that we impress upon people that want to join us in the form of allyship is, here's the thing, we don't need you to be our friend in order for us to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. And we don't need your allyship. What I wish they knew, what I want them to understand is we need you to be an accomplice. And the reason we use the term accomplice is because when I think of an accomplice, you put yourself on the line. If we really, really, really think about what that term means, that means if something happens to me, it's going to happen to you. Whatever consequence happened to me, it's going to happen to you. And if you're not willing to do that, I don't want you around. The thing that really drives me, you know, I was listening to the conversation, and so many things I wish we had the time to really delve into the various topics that some of y'all touched on. But the thing that really, really drives me when I think about it is the idea of, you know, if we go back to what Shayla was talking about, if time was to reverse right now in this moment, if we were living in a world once again where anybody with a skin tone a certain color or darker would be put on chains and buckled up, are you about to fight for me? Or are you about to save yourself? And if I think you're about to save yourself, what I need you to understand is I don't trust you. I don't trust you. And until I feel like that trust is there, you are not you can be an ally all you want. I don't like the term because we have gotten too comfortable with it in this country. People have used that term to a sense of, oh, I'm an ally, I support you, great, cool, go be over there. But when you become an accomplice, you can come in the same room with me. I don't want to be at your table. I don't need to be at your table. You can come sit at my table and let's have that conversation. And that's really what I really want allies to understand. So until you truly feel that you are willing to put yourself on that line, like ask yourself, are you really making a difference? We are not at a time where we need to sugarfoot around this conversation. Like we just don't. Like we cannot reverse in history. And whether you're talking about it from a space of entrepreneurship or any other topic, like really we are at a place where I don't have the time. You know, Faye talked about it, and I think, and I may mispronounce her name, so I apologize in advance. Darlisa talked about it, but we have our networks and we have our spaces that we can do things and make magic happen. And if you are not going to be a part of making that magic happen, if you feel that you need the power, you need the glory, and you need all that stuff that comes with being our ally, get out of my face. And that's what I want them to know.
I'm holding back tears right now because this is what we live. And this is, these are the things that we're always afraid to say, because you don't know what's going to come back on you, and you don't know what impact it's going to have on your ability to continue to do your work and to have a job or to pay, you know, support your family. And so we don't say these things, but we feel them and we live them every day. So Magali.
Yep,
continue.
It's round robin. So my question, okay, I'll jump in with my question, and it's for LC. And really it's from your work and the things that you do, what do you feel are the strengths of women of color? And you know, that of color thing kind of bothered me too, but we'll just go with that. Women of color as it relates to entrepreneurship, like what is our, not just what is our strengths, but like just focus on what do you think our key strengths are? Because if I was to talk about Black women in general, we got all the strengths. Name it, we got it, we can do it. That's my honest opinion. So what do you feel are the key strengths as it relates to women of color in entrepreneurship? And then also, what do you think are the biggest obstacles that we face?
So Magali, I was actually gonna jump in after you spoke and told you don't even bother asking that question because I'm not about to answer that. I am about to, however, reflect on some of the things you just said, because I was over here, my heart's racing, my palms are sweaty. I'm just like, whew, let me make sure I say this right. But I think one of the powerful things about a fishbowl is that it's a conversation, right? And so it's about reflecting on what's being said. And you know, if there was something that I would want allies to know, I would want them to know this is life and death, right? So when Breonna Taylor was murdered in her literal bed, still has not had justice served. When George Floyd was publicly executed and a white man felt comfortable standing on his neck for 9 minutes. Do you know how long 9 minutes is? Now, first of all, I have a 3-year-old, so I know that 9 minutes is a literal eternity. But watching that video and seeing that somebody can be so callous to stand on somebody's neck for 9 minutes as another human being calls out for his mother, for breath. And to know that that is the country that we live in, right? And I said it before, but I just want to be very clear. There are no broken systems in this country. Okay, this country was built upon the notion that white people, their comfort, their wealth, their desires have precedent over every other person, right? Every person who owned land here before white people came here, every person who was existing before white people colonized and then belittled their cultures. That's what our country is based off of. And so when I think about these conversations around entrepreneurship, and I think about these conversations around all of these conversations we're having, this is life and death for us. Because all of the things that are happening, all the things we're talking about, bias, we're talking about bureaucracy, we're talking about, all of these different things that entrepreneurs are encountering. And those are the things that we encounter as people. Right? As people who are trying to raise kids, as people who are trying to live, as people who are trying to build, as people who are trying to dream. These are the things that we're encountering on the day-to-day basis. And I remember the day that George Floyd was murdered. And, working at Forward Cities has been a really interesting experience for me because, we do a lot of really powerful work and we talk pretty honestly about race. But we still have some, we're a diverse staff. And I remember that morning, I literally got up and I had an email from one of my colleagues, was a white guy who I really appreciate. And we were supposed to get coffee and he had emailed me. This was before all this, the news broke and was just like, hey, I can't wait to get coffee and catch up. And I remember looking at that email and I was like, I do not want to fucking talk to you right now. I literally don't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to none of my white colleagues. I don't want to talk to none of y'all right now. And I think the experience of navigating, and I'm being very particular about my experience as a Black woman, because as Magali kind of alluded to, I think sometimes we use the phrase people of color, we get very comfortable with that phrase. People of color are not a monolith, right? Like Gabe and I have been colleagues for several years. Gabe's experience as a Latino man entrepreneur is very different than my experience as a Black woman. So when we use this general phrase, people of color, it can become very problematic because it doesn't make us interrogate who are these individual people and how has that group of people been systematically oppressed in very specific ways, and what is the result of that? And I think as a Black person too, I know that we often use, and sometimes we'll use the phrase people of color when we don't want to talk specifically about Blackness, right? Because we don't want to just say Black people have experienced. And I'm being very intentional about talking about my experience here as a Black woman, because as an entrepreneur, these are all the things that I carry, right? So I carried so much mourning with me in watching this Black man murdered, calling for his mother. I have a Black son who I'm raising in this world. And so I then had to go to work that day and the next day and the next day. And all the while I'm trying to contribute, I'm trying to lead, and I'm trying to contribute these ideas. And I have all this trauma that I can't even wake up without thinking about my Black husband and my Black son going out in this world, and you trying to ask me to build an ecosystem map. I don't have it in me. I don't have it in me to build this fucking map, right? And so I think just being very honest and real about the things that, we talk about what is the experience of Black women entrepreneurs, what are their strengths? You know what my strength was? I built that fucking map because I got up, I was mourning, I was crying, I was thinking about my Black husband, I was thinking about my Black son, and I still got up and built that map. And I didn't get enough credit for it. Because every single thing that entrepreneurs of color do, every single thing that Black entrepreneurs do, they are doing as part of an uphill battle in a country that still does not recognize their full humanity. And until that happens, until Black entrepreneurs don't have to, on one hand, spend 50% of their energy trying to figure out how to even advocate for their humanity. And then on top of that are trying to being tasked with being creative, with navigating resources, with not having the right relationships. It's exhausting. And I think it's really important for allies. And I think it's important for all of us to know, you know what, like I deserve all the gold stars, you know, and those entrepreneurs that you're working with, they deserve all the gold stars. Because when you have to fight to be human, in addition to finding resources for your business, it's exhausting. It's exhausting. And we're exhausted, right? But we're still doing it. And I think that's what's so powerful about who we are as a people, is that my people were, I read this, I'll say this last thing. I love this quote that was written by a scholar who was talking about Octavia Butler, who's a feminist science fiction writer in the 80s in particular, but very prolific. And the quote said, you know, when you are children of an oppressed people, you are literal figments of science fiction. Our ancestors dreamt us up and then bent reality to create us. We have been creating new futures that we have not seen since we came to this country. We were fighting for freedom before and after we had not even tasted that type of freedom in this country. And we found a way to say, you know what, I'm about to use my radical imagination. And not only am I going to fight for this freedom, I'm going to envision something I've never seen, I've never tasted. My ancestors haven't had access to this. And I came up with it. We built it. And then we got there. Right. And so we are a people of radical imagination. And when I hear folks talk about, you know, Black entrepreneurs this and Black entrepreneurs that, and they don't automatically start with all of the assets, start with the fact that like we've been building in this country, we've been contributing. It really frustrates me. So anyway, I'm about to give myself a heart attack. My heart is racing so fast. Let me be quiet. That's all I'm gonna say.
Breathe. You can breathe. I'm gonna give you a break.
Ooh, I'm done.
No, I want to thank you from the bottom of my soul for that. That is exactly what we need to be talking about. That is exactly the conversation. I want to make sure everybody else has enough time to share. So since it is fully cracked open now, I'm just gonna jump to, we're gonna throw out the questions, and I'm gonna ask Charlton just to share reflections on, you know, what you've heard so far, or something that's really resonating with you that you'd like to share with the rest of the.
Yeah, I think what's important is, and what I keep hearing is that it's, the reason why we're where we are is because it's by design, it's systemic. And, you know, so I hopped in at the end of Shayla, and Shayla mentioned the return on investment. The $1 you give to a Black entrepreneur, Black woman entrepreneur returns more than a white male. And, you know, in regards to the work that we're doing, we're trying to ensure that Black entrepreneurs get their fair share of dollars. And we're fighting for this, even though statistically, there was a McKinsey study. I remember a conversation with Melissa Bradley, and she was talking about this McKinsey study that said that it suggested that the data showed that it correlated that, you know, investing in diverse teams correlated to a better financial performance. And if you are a fund manager, if your job is to ensure a good return, what is holding you back from looking at, if I give more dollars to Black women entrepreneurs, I'm going to get a better return? There's something holding you back because the data is clear. Keep giving the money until the data doesn't show that there's going to be a return. Now, if there's a problem with who you're giving it to, like, it's other things besides your actual job. And so I think that is a very interesting and alarming, and frankly, it is the most explicit. This is what the data shows. Give more dollars, you're going to get a better return. That, I mean, I think that makes me kind of think through, you know, back to like the ideas of the systems. It's, you know, we need to, you know, there's a ban warm introductions movement because, you know, the access and the networks where you can gain the capital we've been historically excluded from. I was just thinking, so I live in Georgia and the Masters were just here, and it took till 1990 for there to be a Black member at the Augusta National. And, you know, you think in traditional business, you make deals on the golf course. It took till 2012 for there to be the first woman to be a member of Augusta National. And so it's just these, you know, these systems, these historical, you know, inequities that were designed to exclude us. And it's, so yeah, so that's, I mean, that's what comes about. And, you know, back to LC, we are fighting two battles. We are trying to overcome and wake up, you know, we're waking up every day behind, and also have the same challenges as an entrepreneur, as, you know, these folks in the innovative ecosystem. And so we are moving mountains to do the same work. So that's, I mean, that's what comes to mind. And I think for our work, you know, going, you know, thinking through the spring and the police murders, and this, you know, this sea change of people saying, well, now we're ready to see this investment. Now we're ready to, you know, put our money where our mouth is. I think, you know, I've seen the early data that shows that it didn't even really matter. All of the commitments didn't really even show anything. And so I don't know, those are the thoughts that are coming to mind. I think something that's interesting that I saw recently was that, you know, Yale Endowment said that, you know, we're going to look at the diversity of teams and the money managers. And, you know, that's part of it. It's who are giving the fund managers money. But then if you look at Yale Endowment's team themselves, are they holding themselves to the same standard that they are then holding everyone else to? It's a both and. And so I think that's the last thought, is where are those positions of power where you can influence the people that, you know, you are allocating dollars to? How can you influence them to make the right decisions? And what can you do where you are? Is you look around, are you seeing that diversity? Are you seeing that inclusion? Do people have a voice? Do people have agency to make actions? That's kind of the things that came to mind. And I'm going to stop rambling now, but.
Oh, thank you. You know what, Charles, I think come at this from a different perspective, I think is really important. Like, this is what I think when I hear you say that is there's just these layers of things, right? What is keeping this from happening? We know the truth, we know the data, but it's fear. You don't want to give up power, and that's what this is going to take. People are going to have to. This is what they're afraid of, right? And I think it's also like we're in a challenging position too. On top of all the stuff that we got to deal with, we're also in a position where we are actually have to be held we're being held accountable, right? So we have people looking at us to make sure we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, right? While we're always having to play that middle ground, right? Because we have to be able to find out, okay, we have to get these keep resources flowing for the work that we want to do. So we have to kind of be, you know, speak the language, and you know, we're speaking in code, and we're, you know, having to, you know, this is not the way it should be. We should be able to just show up and be who we are, and not have to have these two different conversations.
I know our time is tight, but I have to jump in and say this response to that.
Yeah.
So here's the thing with the world that we live in, especially since George Floyd happened, and the things that we're seeing, everybody now, not just groups like each of our organizations that have been committed to this work. Everybody now is committed to this work, right? And as we talk about access, as we talk about capital, as we talk about venture capitalists, as we talk about all of that, and you mentioned power, like I think that's the biggest thing that people are afraid of losing. And let me be clear, people mean white people, primarily white males. That is what they are afraid of losing. You know, when the statistic first came out years ago that by 2050, we won't have a majority or whatever. I don't know the circles that you all run in, but I watched my circles and watched my community and watched white men spiral. That was the most uncomfortable thing for them to hear. In this moment, going back to the original point that I'm making, this moment of of everybody pro-Black or pro-minority or pro-whatever, it's a power move. And we need to be very careful not to be fooled. Very, very careful. So that's the thing that I think as ecosystem builders that we each of us are, that's the position that I think it puts us in. As far as you mentioned juggling, again, hopefully you all can tell by now, I'm not here to cater to you. So I'm not going to speak your language. I'm not going to do crap because I exist to make you uncomfortable. Because for all of your life, you made my people uncomfortable, right? So I think as we move forward, that's something we really need to think about in our communities as it relates to power. Is this genuine? Is this really going to move our people forward? And if not, you have to ask yourself if you want to sit at that table or if you want to shake that hand and do business with these people. I'm gonna be quiet because I know we tight on.
No. And one thing I will say to that, Magali, is you got to understand, we know what happens. You saw what happened to me when you say it, when you speak it out loud, you become a pariah. And that is so we have to we're putting ourselves on the line by speaking truth. And that's what we're just gonna have to keep doing, right?
That's why you need accomplices. People who, if you ride or die or not.
Yeah.
You know, LC said this is life or death. That's exactly where I am with it. Are you willing to die with me on this? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yes. So I would love to have each of our three remaining panelists. I know we're running over, but I think it's really important. If you can just each share a couple minutes, that'd be great. Hassan?
Yeah, I think there's a clear, like what I've heard here is that there's a clear juxtaposition between what you would normally expect in conversations about entrepreneurship. So conversations about entrepreneurship are always about like transactional. They're always transactional conversations. I mean, the act, what we're talking about here is like the act of entrepreneurship, of imagining something that doesn't exist and creating it. Because there's, in everybody that's spoken today, I mean, it's so clear that there is a lot, all of us are carrying the pain and the dreams of our ancestors, and there's an obligation that comes along with that. And we have safe conversations all the time. And again, it's because of, you know, you're thinking about your career, you're thinking about the group that you're with, and the ramifications of, you know, can you speak fully what's on your mind, or do you have to, you know, taper it to what the group that you're with, and what are the implications of all of it? We have safe, and I think that's why a lot of people were so caught off guard with the civil unrest, and a lot of people still don't get it. It's because people expect safe conversations all the time, and they assume that the safe conversations that have happened over time are truly what people are feeling. And there's a lot of pain that a lot of people carry inside, that we're all carrying inside. And I think it's conversations like this and being open and transparent and honest, that'll actually drive change. Because I mean, honestly, I was really, and I know we had questions. This was really, really great for me. The fact that everybody talked about what was truly on their mind, regardless of what the question was, or because these are the kind of conversations that we need to have.
Thank you, Hassan. I'm going to go to Gabe, and then we'll round out with Darlisa.
I just wanted to, I think mine is more about advocating for entrepreneurs, but in regards to the Latino community, I mean, the Latino purchasing power now is topped over $1.7 trillion. But folks still see the community as being this one monolithic group, and the Latino community is very diverse. 65% of Hispanics speak another language other than English at home. But yet, for a lot of the entrepreneur support organizations, a lot of groups, they provide no budget. There's no funding for interpreting services to be able to reach out to assist. There's definitely a big lack of hiring and recruiting folks into these organizations with folks that understand the community. And even when folks are hired, sometimes they get pigeonholed and they don't help them develop and build up their skills and whatnot. And so yeah, I just want to throw that out there. I know we're short on time.
Thank you, Gabe. I appreciate it. I think it's really important and I think that's what's hard. I think what we're going to have to do is, in order to really address the needs of different people groups, we're going to have many of these conversations about the different people groups that are affected in different ways and have different lived experiences, because we cannot smush them all together. It does not work. We did it for the sake of sort of time and expediency in this setting. But I think these conversations, we need to have more of them, and we need to have them on specific issues, and in particular for communities that have experienced different sets of structural inequities. And immigrant communities, it's a whole nother set of conversations that we need to have as well. So thank you for sharing that. So we'll have Darlisa. I think you are up last.
Ooh, okay. So I'm like you, Faye. I get real emotional when it comes to these kind of conversations. So I'm like fighting my own tears simply because I can agree with every single passion that has been felt in these conversations, from the allies to the accomplices to the we're fighting for our lives to the systematic racism issues to whatever the case may be. And myself, I started my journey in corporate America, which was healthcare, and was blatantly told, and this was when I was in a corporate structure, that finger to my face by a white male, look here, little black girl, when I tell you to do something, that's what you had better do. So it's from situations like that helped me to birth my center today, because there are people that are out here fighting. And if this is not a fight that you have on a daily basis, you won't know. You won't understand. And you can have a conversation over and over and over again, but until you live it, it really won't resonate. You can watch it on TV, you can tweet about it, chat about it, but until you wake up in the morning and you have to ask yourself, is my husband safe? Is my son safe? Am I safe? If I drive down the street, am I, officers having a bad day, am I the next one that's going to deal with this kind of issue? So it's far beyond just entrepreneurship. So imagine, like LC stated, we're battling these types of emotions just in general. So to put that on top of trying to run a business in a space where you have major players and major organizations that realize that there is strength in the Black communities and there is strength in organizations that are funded and ran primarily by Black entrepreneurs. So what do? Instead of coming alongside of you and saying, I got your back. I'm right here with you. When you go to that bank, I'm right here with you asking those questions. They steal your information and they create their own. So then it becomes this awareness of support for minority businesses, but really, you're not supporting me. You're not supporting me at all. You're stealing from me. And basically, you're making it even harder for me to do my job. You're making it even harder for me to put food on my family's table when every night you go home and you feed your family. And every night, because you work for a system that says, I support entrepreneurs, but you don't realize that some of us, we are really out here and this is our bread and butter. And if we don't have that, we can't go into a corporate structure and say, I want to climb the ladder, because for a lot of us, that ladder is a step stool. So as we continue to have these conversations over and over and over again, like, really, are we feeling what's happening? Or are we just listening to what's happening? Because at the end of the day, I'm gonna fight for my family. I'm gonna go to bat for my family. And if that means I gotta go head up with a CEO, CFO, COO, whoever you are, my company means that much to me. So you can have $1 million or you can have $1, because at the end of the day, the people that we are serving, the people that we are sitting next to, the people that we talk to on a day-to-day basis, there's so many people fighting just so many different things. And if you do not believe that these biases, these issues are happening, and if you've ever been a person to say, I don't believe it, Today, I'm challenging you to believe it, and not only believe it, research, find out, talk to some of these people because it's real. And so I champion what Magdalene said. Don't tell me you want to help me and leave it at that. No, ride this thing out with us. You know, if I call upon you, I'm not calling you because, you know, I want to take a selfie with you just to show my network. No, we need your help. So if you sit at a position where you can impact real change, don't send me a grant application that requires me to give you my life history, my income, and everything else, and you're going to approve me for a $2 grant fund that's not going to help me do anything. No, that does not help me. Show me the ropes, connect me with the people, put me in a position, bypass that stuff. If you are a person in a position of power, bypass it. You can make the decision. If you find value in companies, businesses, entrepreneurs, all of that kind of stuff, break a rule, because you will do it in any other instance. Break a rule, put that business, put that person on the forefront, and allow them to create an avenue for their families, for their people. I'll stop because I get real worked up, but this is good.
Thank you, Darlisa. What you just described, that's my lived experience, and it's why I am here right now, is because I was doing this work and I had grants stolen. I had an entire center stolen. I lost my job because I was speaking because of the bureaucracy and the BS and all of this deep-seated fear of a Black person stepping into something, a space that they didn't think that I was supposed to be stepping into. And there are conversations being had behind our back about things that we find out about later, right? These are the conversations that are happening. They are happening. I found out that someone said, you know, related to a grant that I had received, well, you know, she shouldn't be trying to live off that grant. I'm like, well, wait a minute. I don't have a job. I am doing this work to serve the entrepreneurs that you won't serve. And I am starving because of it. And you're telling me that I shouldn't be depending on a grant for my livelihood? Who are you? You don't know my life. You don't know anything about what I'm struggling with.
Don't leave out Faye now that everything that they said about you, they are now trying to do. Back to Darlisa's idea of stealing ideas. Okay, I'm gonna be quiet.
Okay, so we're gonna pull it in. We're gonna pull it together. What I would love to do right now is thank each of you. I cannot thank you enough. This is the conversation that I have been wanting to have out loud for 3 or 4 years. So I thank each of you for being willing to show up and have this conversation. And there will be more. I can hear it. I already hear it. I already know there's going to be more of these. So thank you. I would love for everyone who has been a part of this on the other side and been listening. I would love for all of you to take a little time. I know this is heavy. I know it's a lot. Process it. Don't try and don't jump out of discomfort, right? Sit with this. I beg you to sit with this for a few days, right? At least, and then sit with it for a lifetime in terms of then turning it into action. And that's what we're going to dig into next. We're going to start to talk about what do we do and take this information and take this inspiration and what do we do with it? So it's not just words and it's not just talk. All right, thanks all.